They say I was born in a time of chaos, and perhaps that is why I never feared it. Rome was bleeding when I opened my eyes, men in togas whispered like snakes, and heads rolled in the forum as though they were dice cast by indifferent gods. Sulla's shadow fell long and cold across the city when I was still learning my letters, and from the very beginning, I understood that safety was an illusion. Honor was a weapon, wielded not by the virtuous but by those ruthless enough to bend it. My father died when I was but 15. It left me the head of a noble but dwindling line, a Julian by blood, a descendant, they claimed, of Venus herself. But such myths offered no shelter from the dictator. Sulla, drunk on blood and legality, hunted anyone who dared to dream of another Rome. I was young, barely a man, but I defied him. I would not divorce Cornelia, daughter of his enemy Cinna. Love had little to do with it, I would not be commanded. I fled with a bounty on my head, hid in mountains and by the sea, beard unshaven, skin roughened by exile, and there, in the silence between the rustle of branches and the clash of soldiers' boots far below, I made my pact with destiny. They think ambition is born in palaces. No. Ambition is born in flight, when your life has been priced in coin, when you taste dirt and shame and realize that fear is a leash others tighten around your neck. I swore then, never again. I would rise, not for revenge, but for inevitability. I would become the storm Rome feared to name. When Sulla died, I returned. Not as a warrior, not yet, but as a voice. I knew words could cut as deeply as swords. I trained them like hounds, made them obey my rhythm. In the courts, I became a spectacle, draped in mourning black for months, my voice trembling with calculated emotion, I defended the disgraced with fire in my eyes. Crowds gathered not for justice but for theater, and I gave them tragedy, rage, and spectacle, whatever they needed to remember the name Gaius Julius Caesar. But the courts were not enough. Rome's spine was cracking under its own corruption. Senators fattened on fear, and the Republic no longer heard its people cry. I went to Cilicia and Rhodes, chasing oratory, but pirates seized me. They laughed when I told them to double my ransom. I laughed louder. For 40 days I joked with them, wrote poetry in their company, then hunted them down and crucified them as I had promised, a promise made in jest, fulfilled in blood. Let that be a lesson, never mistake charm for weakness. When I returned again, it was to a Rome ripe for fire. I courted the people as one courts a lover, not with gifts, but with attention, with presence. I feasted with them, cried with them, buried my wealth in games and grain. They did not just follow me, they became me. The old guard whispered. Too much power for a young man. But they could not match my flame. They guarded the temple, I walked among the faithful. I won office not by birthright, but by spectacle. Each robe I wore bore the dust of streets I had walked. Each laurel upon my brow was crowned by the hands of the many. They cheered not for a name, but for what I represented, defiance, restoration, the return of something they had lost and no longer knew how to name. They didn't want the Republic back. They wanted to believe again. I knew I had only just begun. Rome was a carcass dressed in tradition, it needed breath, not ritual. And I was ready to deliver it. First, though, I needed a proving ground. I needed a war. A real one. Not for gold. Not for fame. But for transformation. Gaul loomed. Wild. Proud. Rich in defiance. Rome had tried to tame it and failed. I would not try to tame it. I would become it. And through its conquest, I would turn myself from a name into a myth. That was the vision. That was the hunger. That was the next step. But before the eagle flies, it must understand the weight of the sky. And so I sharpened myself, not just with steel, but with silence, waiting for the right moment, the right pretext, the right enemies. They always feared kings. But they had forgotten how a king is not born, he is invited, in whispers, in desperation, in dreams of order. And I was listening. Power begins not with swords, but with stories. Before I ever led a legion, I mastered the crowd. And before I ever touched a general's cloak, I wore the plain white of the populist, the people's man. In Rome, there are many ways to be dangerous. The most subtle is to be adored. They said I was too elegant, too fashionable, too fluent in charm, too soft with the poor, too bold with the Senate. They said I smiled too much for a man of ambition. But they forgot that Rome herself was seduced before she was conquered. I gave her what she hungered for, presents. I stood where the others would not, dined where the aristocrats feared to be seen. I defended laws that the patricians scorned and gave voice to men whose names had never echoed in marble halls. It was not virtue, though I let them believe it. It was vision. I became Pontifex Maximus through scandal and audacity, not the churchman's path, but the politician's. I borrowed coin I did not have, promised fortunes I had not yet earned, wagered reputation I had not yet built. But I won. And in that office, I found the keys not to heaven, but to the soul of the Republic. It was not enough to rule, I had to be seen as destined. Then came Spain, my first command. The veterans there were weary, their officers dim. But I walked among them not as master but as mirror. I asked for no loyalty. I proved I deserved it. I ate their rations, slept in dust, bled when they bled. And when we won, swiftly, brutally, gloriously, I let them carry the tale home. Caesar shares the danger, they said. That was all I needed. In Rome, a name travels faster than a chariot when it's whispered in admiration. Still, I was hungry. Glory ages like bread in the sun. I returned for consulship and won it, not by promises, but by force and finesse. The Senate trembled, as it always did, when someone refused to beg. I gave them Crassus and Pompey, a triumvirate of uneasy thrones. 3 men who needed each other. 3 men who did not trust one another. But for now, we were Rome. They did not see the Gallic wars for what they were. They thought I wanted land. Tribute. Headlines. They did not see what I saw, a crucible. A forge. A place to become what Rome itself had forgotten it needed. The Senate gave me legions out of caution. I gave them legends out of will. When I crossed into Gaul, I did not march like a Roman general. I moved like a flame through dry grass. The tribes were proud, brave in the way that empires forget. But pride is not strategy, and courage without unity is already halfway to defeat. I knew how to divide. I knew how to promise peace to one while preparing war against another. I used their squabbles as ladders. Their honor as bait. Their trust as weapon. And then I gave them what they had never seen, discipline wrapped in ferocity. I trained my men not only to fight but to believe. That they were the edge of something new. That their victories were not just Rome's, but their own. I shared the spoils. I shared the glory. I shared the burden. It is a simple trick, really. Treat men as though their deaths have meaning, and they will walk into death smiling. Meanwhile, in Rome, my enemies stirred. They called me a butcher. A pretender. A traitor in armor. Let them. The crowd still loved me. And love, when it deepens, becomes myth. And myth, if repeated often enough, becomes truth. Pompey watched. The Senate fretted. But they dared not stop me. Not yet. The gold flowed back like river tides. The legions grew fat with loyalty. Every border I crossed felt more like prophecy fulfilled. And in those long, bloody years, I shed the last skin of who I had been. No longer just an orator. No longer just a noble son with charm. In Gaul, I became steel. In Gaul, I became the march. In Gaul, I became the fate I had always whispered to myself in the dark, the one they feared, and the one they would one day kneel to. But I did not forget who I had once been. The boy hunted. The youth mocked. The exile with nothing but a name and a knife of ambition between his ribs. He walked with me still, like a ghost in polished armor. And he whispered, always, not enough. Not yet. I listened. Always. They remember Elysia. They remember the glory, the twin walls, the impossible siege, the enemies trapped and circling like wolves gnawing at a dying beast. They remember Vercingetorix kneeling before me, laying his sword at my feet while the world watched in awe. But they forget how long it took to break him. They forget the blood, endless, soaking through boots until even victory felt like rot. Gaul was not a war. It was a season of becoming. And I did not emerge from it untouched. I thought I understood violence when I crossed the Alps. I thought it was a means to an end. But in the forests, violence is not a tool, it is the air itself. There, among trees that swallowed screams and rivers that carried corpses like driftwood, I learned the truth: greatness is not given. It is taken, from others. From yourself. The tribes fought like men who knew the world was ending. And perhaps for them, it was. I offered peace often, but only to sharpen the blade behind my back. Mercy can be a dagger when timed well. And when it failed, I raised. Burned. Crushed. Entire peoples vanished into dust beneath Roman sandals, and I slept soundly beside their ruins, because if I had faltered even once, it would have been my bones buried in their earth. I became what I needed to become. And my men, gods, my men, they followed me not because they were paid, but because they saw in me the echo of their own fury. The centurions grew old at my side. Their armor dulled, their hands thick with scars, their eyes hollow from winters without fire. I loved them, though I never said it. You do not speak such things to soldiers. You bleed with them. You never let them see you hesitate. Once, during the campaign against the Eburones, I lost an entire legion. Ambushed. Trapped. Slaughtered in the forest by men who vanished like ghosts in the mist. I found their bodies days later. Frozen. Torn. Their standards broken and fouled. I ordered no funerals. Only vengeance. We did not bury them, we avenged them. Every tree that had watched their slaughter, we made it weep sap from its own fire. Yet even then, in the quiet between marches, I wondered what I was becoming. I could recite Virgil by heart, but now my dreams were of screams. I had once written poems to pass the time. Now, I could only write reports of the dead. Still, Rome cheered. Each letter I sent back was met with parades. Each battle became theater. They hung my victories in forums, painted my face on coins, whispered my name like it was sacred wine. But none of them had seen what I had seen, the women wailing beside burnt huts, the warriors who slit their own throats rather than be shown in my triumph. What they loved was not Caesar. It was the idea of him. The myth. The distant war god who brought gold and slaves and stories. So I fed it. I wrote of my campaigns with style and silence, no mention of doubt, of sacrifice, of the children trampled under hoof. Just the facts. The glory. The inevitable rise. And yet, there was a weight. With each new conquest, I grew heavier. Not in body, but in silence. I began to speak less around the fire. I found fewer things amusing. My laughter, when it came, was thinner. Because each victory required a little more of me, not just as general, but as man. I was becoming something fewer could understand. Meanwhile, in Rome, Pompey was shifting. Once ally, now rival. He watched my ascent with eyes that once welcomed me and now measured me. Crassus, the glue between us, had died, melted in the sands of Parthia. Without him, the balance broke. I was winning too much. Becoming too loved. And Rome has never tolerated love without suspicion. The Senate whispered of limits. Of bringing Caesar home. Without his legions. Without his triumph. As if I would return like a dog with its tail curled, grinning for a bone. I knew better. By the time the snows melted after Alesia, I had built more than roads. I had built loyalty that would march through fire with me. 10 legions, hardened, fused to my breath. Their loyalty was not to the Senate. Not to the laws. But to me. Not just Caesar. But their Caesar. I was not a man anymore. I was a direction. And so I waited. Watching Rome from afar, knowing that the next move would not be a campaign. It would be a crossing. There is a silence that comes before great things. Not the silence of peace, but of thunder holding its breath. I remember the wind at the banks of the Rubicon, how it did not move. How even the trees seemed unsure whether to lean toward war or retreat. We had marched through frost and mud, 10 legions thick with memory, the kind of men who no longer flinched at screams or begged the gods for sleep. But when we reached that river, they stopped. So did I. The Rubicon was nothing. A thin line of water winding through northern Italy, you could cross it with dry ankles in summer. But it was a wall all the same. Not of stone, but of law. To cross it with legions was to declare war on Rome. On Pompey. On the Senate. On everything I had once sworn to protect. They say I stood long at its edge. That I said nothing for hours. That the men behind me held their breath as if their lungs knew that history was being conjured. They say I spoke a single phrase, "Let the die be cast." It is true. I said it not with triumph, but with resolve. Because I knew what came next could not be undone. I had not come to this edge in haste. Letters from Rome had reached me like poison through parchment. The Senate, emboldened by Pompey, demanded I disband my army, return as a private citizen, stand trial for my triumphs. They feared what I had become. They feared the love of the people. They feared that in Caesar, Rome saw herself again, proud, decisive, unafraid. But I would not return in chains. Not in silence. Not after all I had endured to carve my name into the marrow of empire. When I crossed the Rubicon, I did not shout. I did not raise a standard. I simply stepped forward. One foot into the water, then another. And Rome changed. The legions followed. No hesitation. Not a single man turned back. Some smiled. Others prayed. But none doubted. I had given them glory. I had given them identity. Now they would give me history. Word spread faster than fire. Cities opened their gates without a fight. Senators fled like startled birds, robes flapping, treasures bundled in haste. Pompey, once the great general, retreated from the capital, not out of cowardice, but calculation. He needed time. He needed numbers. He still believed the Republic could be defended by the men who had hollowed it. I marched slowly. Not to delay, but to savor. Rome welcomed me not with arms, but with flowers. The crowds chanted as if a god had returned from exile. Mothers held their children high. Old veterans wept. I did not need to conquer the city. It had already given itself to me. Yet I did not linger. I knew Pompey would not go quietly. He gathered legions in Greece, summoned every old alliance, every noble house that feared the world I was shaping. They thought they fought for tradition. But what they really fought for was control. I left Mark Antony in Rome, a shadow of my will, and set out to finish what had begun with a single step into that river. The march east was relentless. Through Apulia, across the sea, into the heart of old friendships now turned hostile. Pompey was not a fool. He avoided open battle. He starved us of supply, bled us with attrition. I knew what he was doing, forcing me into haste. Hoping I would make the mistake of arrogance. But I had not survived Gaul by being predictable. At Dyrrhachium, we met, and I lost. Not utterly. But I bled. For the first time in years, I tasted retreat. It burned. The men murmured. Some feared that the old lion had not aged so much after all. But even then, I saw it. Pompey hesitated. He had the advantage, and he did not use it. He had forgotten how to kill. Rome had made him cautious. Comfortable. I would not make that mistake. I regrouped. Reforged. And I marched again. Crossing the Rubicon was not a moment, it was a path. A slow unraveling of all the lies we had told ourselves about the Republic. About law. About honor. It was not one step. It was 1,000. Each taken with knowledge, not innocence. I had chosen this road, and I would walk it to the end. You must understand, I did not want to destroy Rome. I wanted to finish building her. But sometimes, to raise a new pillar, you must pull down the old. And I was no longer afraid to break what needed breaking. They call it civil war, as if there was anything civil about it. It was not a war for land. Not even truly for Rome. It was a war for memory, for the right to define what Rome was, and what she would become. And in that war, I faced not barbarians, but Romans. Men who had once toasted with me. Men who knew my face better than their gods. Men I had once loved, and now had to destroy. Pompey was the last of the old world, and he wore its armor well. The Senate had made him its sword, its shield, its desperate answer to the question my existence posed. He had wealth, fleets, reputation. He had Eastern kings sending him elephants and gold. He had half the patrician class dreaming of a Rome without me. But he did not have my legions. He did not have the forests of Gaul burned into their bones. He did not have men who had crossed mountains for him, nor soldiers who would march starving so long as I marched beside them. Still, he bled me. At Dyrrhachium, he drew me into a trap I barely escaped. He had learned caution, and in that, he grew dangerous. He starved us, outnumbered us, outmaneuvered us. My men ate grass in Epirus. They drank vinegar. But they stayed. Because they remembered. Because I remembered with them. When the moment finally came, at Pharsalus, I let Pompey choose the ground. He had more men, fresher supplies, high positions. His cavalry outnumbered mine 5-1. I knew what he would try. A sweep, a break, a rout. I let him try. And then I broke him. I took my few cavalry and hid infantry behind them. When the cavalry charge came, as it always came with Pompey, all thunder and plume, I gave no ground. I waited. And when they reached us, I unleashed the hidden blades. He collapsed. It wasn't just a victory. It was an undoing. His army crumbled not because they died, but because they saw the future in us, and it did not include him. I walked the battlefield after, the dust still thick, the bodies warm. So many Romans. So many men who had once cheered my speeches. I remember stepping over a ring I recognized, a gift I had once given at a banquet. Blood clung to it like wax. Pompey fled. First to the sea, then to Egypt. I followed. I wanted him to live. I did not say it aloud, but I did. I wanted to offer mercy. To finish the war not with a death, but with a gesture. I knew what Rome thought of me, tyrant, rebel, destroyer. A clemency would have said more than any edict. A pardon would have rewritten me. But I was too late. Ptolemy's court had already murdered him, to curry favor with the man they thought would rule next. I was handed Pompey's head in a basket. I did not thank them. I wept. They had not understood. Pompey was not just an enemy. He was a mirror. A rival worthy of myth. With his death, the last breath of the old republic seemed to escape the world. I was left victorious, but more alone than ever. The war did not end there. Pockets of resistance remained. Labienus, once my own officer, turned against me. Cato still held North Africa, preaching principle in a desert of corpses. And yet none of it felt sharp. It was all aftermath. Echoes of a battle already decided. What I felt was not triumph. It was a deepening. A gravity. I could no longer pretend this was a crusade. It was a transformation. I had broken something. Now I had to replace it. Not just in laws, but in spirit. Rome could not go back. And I could not walk backward into the man I once was. I sent word home, of victory, of clemency, of restoration. But I knew what it really meant. The Republic had died. And all that remained was what I chose to build in its place. They think I went to Egypt for vengeance. For war. For Pompey. But in truth, I arrived seeking pause. A moment to catch my breath, to find the edges of myself again after so much blood. Instead, I found Cleopatra. Alexandria was a city that pretended not to be dying. Its libraries still smoked with knowledge, its palaces shimmered with perfumes and perfumed lies. But beneath the gold, there was rot, a kingdom split, a boy king on one throne, his sister exiled, civil war clothed in incense. I had stepped from Rome's storm into another, and yet it felt strangely familiar. They brought me Pompey's head the morning I landed. Wrapped in linen. Flies already settling on the waxy skin. The boy king's court waited for praise, for alliance. Instead, I turned away. I had not traveled across continents for a trophy. And I would not shake the hand that ordered that kind of cowardice. That night, she came to me. Not with soldiers. Not with banners. But in a rug. Unrolled at my feet, laughing, eyes like midnight fire. Cleopatra. The exiled queen. The serpent Rome could not understand. I should have dismissed her. Instead, I listened. She spoke as I had not heard a woman speak before. Not begging. Not flattering. Calculating. Proud. She wore her danger like silk. She knew that I did not need Egypt, but that I needed something else now. Not conquest. Not applause. But vision. And she offered me one. She wanted her throne. She wanted her brother out. I gave her that. Not because of lust, though lust came. Not because of love, though I did care for her in my own way. No, I gave her the throne because she saw what I saw, the old world fading. And she had no intention of fading with it. We made war in Alexandria. The boy king's forces rose against us. Fires reached the harbor, and the great library, centuries of parchment, burned beneath our watch. I regret that, though I did not start the blaze. History lost to ambition. Truth turned to smoke. But we won. And when the sea calmed and the dead were counted, Cleopatra reigned. She rode beside me through the streets not as consort, but as equal. The people bowed, though they did not know who they feared more, the Roman or the queen. In her, I glimpsed something Roman women never dared to show. Sovereignty. The power to command without apology. I stayed with her longer than I should have. We drifted the Nile like gods in painted barges, as if the world outside had paused for our indulgence. In those days, I did not speak of Rome. I did not speak of Senate edicts or triumphs waiting. I listened to the priests chant in tongues older than Latin. I watched her son, my son, sleep beneath papyrus shade. Yes. I gave her a child. Caesar. Little Caesar. Not an heir, not in Roman eyes, but flesh of my flesh all the same. A legacy not shaped by war, but by want. There are days I still wonder if I should have stayed. But Rome was calling. Rome does not rest. It does not forget. And while I floated through dreams in Alexandria, the Republic twisted in my absence. Mark Antony had held the city, but enemies stirred. Cato in Utica. Scipio in Africa. Senators who spat my name and prayed to dead gods that I would drown in foreign silk. So I returned. I left Cleopatra on her throne, not as an afterthought, but as a promise. I told her nothing of crowns or futures. Only that I would come again. I meant it. At the time. Back in Rome, they welcomed me with thunder. Triumph stretched across weeks, not for Pompey's death, which I would not celebrate, but for Gaul, for Egypt, for the strength that returned bearing olive branches and iron alike. But beneath the cheers were murmurs. Eyes watching too closely. Statues rising too soon. Whispers of tyranny, even as I offered clemency to every soul who had lifted a sword against me. They did not yet know what I had become. What I had seen. That I no longer craved Rome's approval. I craved her transformation.
Rome stood for me, but not because she loved me. She stood because I had become the inevitable. When I returned, I did not knock on the gates. They were already open. The Senate met not to debate, but to perform. They passed honors faster than messengers could carry them. Statues of me rose like crops after rain, in the forum, on coins, in temples once reserved for gods. I should have been flattered. Instead, I felt the cold hand of distance. A man raised too high becomes a mirror they cannot recognize. I took no throne. I wore no crown. But they named me Dictator Perpetuo, Dictator in perpetuity. A title that smelled of fear disguised as gratitude. They thought the name would tame me. That by making my power official they might contain it. But what they failed to see was that I had no desire for titles. I had already won the only thing I had ever wanted. Control of Rome's direction. So I governed. Not as tyrant, but as surgeon. I restructured the calendar, a small thing, perhaps, but the very rhythm of Roman life now moved to my measure. I appointed senators from Gaul, from Spain, from places the old guard had once called savage. I filled the courts with new voices. I gave land to veterans, reformed grain laws, planned cities to outlast my name. They called it monarchy in disguise. I called it efficiency. Rome had drifted in a fog of tradition. I brought clarity. But clarity is dangerous to those who hide behind rituals. They watched me with narrowing eyes. Brutus, Cassius, men I had spared. Men who had once fought me and to whom I had offered olive branches when swords would have served me better. They nodded in the Senate but whispered elsewhere. They told themselves and each other that the Republic could still be revived if the shadow of Caesar were removed. As if I were a shadow. As if I had not simply revealed what the Republic had long become, a theater where the few ruled and the many bled. Even my friends grew quiet. Cicero praised my reforms in public but wrote doubts in his letters. Mark Antony, loyal, brutish, loud, drank too much and joked too freely. I began to feel the isolation that only kings truly know. I was surrounded by men and yet none could speak plainly. I missed the fields of Gaul, the campfire truths, the honesty of war. I visited the provinces, Spain, North Africa, the East. Wherever I went, the people greeted me not as dictator, not even as general, but as something higher. I heard them chant king in languages older than Latin. I waved it off. I was not king. I had said it many times. But the word hovered. It clung to me like perfume. Sweet, dangerous. Then came the crown. It was a festival. The people chanted my name, drunk on bread and spectacle. Antony approached with the laurel and gold, lifted it high before the crowd. There was a pause long enough for all Rome to hold its breath. I refused. Applause. He offered it again. Again, I refused. But not because I feared it. Because I was watching them. Watching how many mouths smiled. How many did not. How many eyes flicked to each other, calculating, measuring, waiting. It was a test and I gave them the answer they needed. Not yet. Not like this. I left the forum to thunder. But I did not smile. I began to dream differently after that. Not of campaigns. Not even of Cleopatra. I dreamed of marble halls turned to dust. Of statues toppled. Of names forgotten. I woke often, sweating, heart heavy. Not with guilt, I had long since buried that, but with anticipation. Because I knew what was coming. I knew that men cannot love what they fear too deeply. And I had become too large. I no longer fit within their vision of Rome. I had not changed. I had only revealed her. And they would not forgive me for that.
I had walked through 1,000 battles, but it was silence that warned me. Not swords. Not speeches. Just silence. The kind that filled rooms after I left. The kind that lived behind Brutus' eyes when he smiled a moment too long. The kind that made my wine taste slightly different. There are no horns before betrayal, only glances, only pauses. The Senate stirred. Not all at once. Treachery is never loud in its beginning. It starts with dinners you are no longer invited to. With questions disguised as praise. With friends who nod more than they speak. I had returned from Spain victorious again, another rebellion crushed, another proof that there was no rival left. And yet, for all my triumphs, the air had grown colder in Rome. They had run out of reasons to hate me, and so they created one. The statues were not mine. The titles were not mine. They were theirs, given freely, out of fear, or hope, or calculation. But now they used them against me. Too many honors, they whispered. Too many games. Too many symbols. As if it had not been they who had declared me father of the fatherland, imperator for life, a living god. As if I had forced them to erect my likeness beside Romulus. The truth was simpler. I had shown them the future, and they could not see themselves in it. They remembered the old republic as something holy, when it had, in truth, been a mask for greed and stagnation. They remembered Cincinnatus, who gave up power. They wanted me to do the same. To return Rome to its endless debates, to the hands of the same old names. But I was not Cincinnatus. I had not seized Rome's reins to hand them back to the men who had led her toward collapse. I had crossed the Rubicon not to be temporary, but to be transformative. Still, I gave them shows. I passed laws. I forgave again and again. I spared the very men I should have broken. I thought magnanimity would buy peace. I was wrong. To forgive a snake is only to teach it patience. Brutus, he hurt most of all. His father had died fighting me. His mother had carried knives in her mouth. But I had taken him in, made him my own. Rome saw us as father and son, and I let them. Perhaps I even believed it. Perhaps that was the final delusion. That love, once given, might be enough. There were dreams, too. Warnings. My wife woke one night, trembling. "Do not go to the Senate tomorrow," she whispered. Blood in the hall. I kissed her forehead. I told her fear makes shadows larger than they are. But I had seen them too, the wolves circling in laurels. On the Ides of March, I woke strangely calm. The sky was bright. The air too still. My servants hesitated when dressing me. A parchment was placed in my hand on the steps of the Curia, a warning, and signed. I folded it. Did not read it. Not because I did not care. But because I already knew. Destiny is not always a choice. Sometimes it is a path that has been narrowing for years, and the end is only the shape of your own footsteps catching up with you. When I entered the Senate, I smiled. There were too many of them there. Too many who did not usually attend. Some eyes would not meet mine. Others stared too long. I stood beneath the statue of Pompey, the old general I had defeated. Perhaps they thought it poetic. Perhaps they thought the Republic would breathe again once I had stopped. But they had misunderstood me. I was not a tyrant. I was a mirror. And they were about to shatter it. The marble was cold that morning. Colder than it should have been. The Senate gathered in the Curia of Pompey, his statue looming behind the seats, cast in stone as if to witness what flesh could no longer contest. I had always found that statue amusing. Now it seemed prophetic. They stood as I entered. One by one, rising in silence, robes whispering against the floor like waves folding back from a shore. I walked among them not as a man expecting death, but as one expecting a question. A decision. One final test. But the decision had already been made. A senator approached with a scroll. A petition, he said. I reached to take it, and that was the cue. The signal hidden in courtesy. Hands moved. Robes parted. Steel caught light. The first blade struck beneath my arm. I gasped, not from pain, but surprise. Even then, I could not believe it. Not fully. To be Caesar, and to be touched so easily. Another came. Then another. They did not shout. They did not speak. The chamber was filled with the sick hush of work being done by cowards. They struck as a pack, not with the skill of warriors, but with the panic of men who feared they might fail if they waited too long. I fought back, briefly. Grabbed a wrist. Shoved a chest. But there were too many. And I saw faces, faces I knew. Men I had dined with. Men I had saved. Men I had pardoned. Casca. Decimus. Cinna. Brutus. He came late. Always the thinker. I caught his eyes as he raised the dagger. And there, in that instant, I felt the sting, not of the blade, but of understanding. That I had raised him for this. That my mercy had written my own elegy. Et tu, brute. Not a plea. Not accusation. A farewell. A recognition. The last stone laid on the monument of my own making. I did not scream. I did not curse. I covered my face with my toga, the way a general falls, not as a man, but as a symbol. I sank beneath the feet of men I had made powerful, beneath the marble eyes of a dead rival, beneath the dreams I had dared to believe Rome could survive. They left me there, bleeding. Alone. No cheers. No weeping. Just footsteps fading, like a storm that had passed through and would not look back. In that final stillness, I felt not rage. Not fear. Only silence. And then, strangely, peace. Because I knew the truth, they had not killed Caesar. They had made him immortal. I died beneath Pompey's statue. My blood pooled at the feet of a man I had once called friend, once called rival, once called Roman. But Rome did not die with me. No. She changed. They thought it would end there, with my body growing cold on Senate stone. That by cutting the man, they would cauterize the future. But death does not silence a voice. It amplifies it. It breaks it loose from the cage of time. And mine was not buried in a tomb. It scattered like seed. The forum echoed with panic the next day. My body still warm, the people gathered, stunned. I had fed them. Led them. Touched their children's heads in the streets. I had been their Rome. And now I was gone, taken not by enemy blade, but by senatorial hands wearing polished rings. Mark Antony stood at my funeral pyre. The mask he wore cracked at last. He read my will aloud, how I had left wealth to the people, land to the poor, and named my heir. Not Brutus. Not the Senate. Octavius. My blood. The boy arrived quiet, shadow thin, but Rome felt the tremor. He took my name. Not the letters, but the fire. Caesar. Not a title. Not anymore. A prophecy. The city rose in anger. The temples shook with chants. My effigy was paraded like a martyr, crowned in laurels, cloaked in fire. They burned my murderers' names in the streets. Civil war followed, not out of chaos, but out of meaning. Everyone, suddenly, wanted to decide what I had stood for. What my death meant. What kind of Rome would rise from my absence. Brutus and Cassius fled east, chased by the very republic they claimed to save. They died on foreign soil, their ideals folded into graves no one visited. Cato had already swallowed his tongue. Cicero, clever tongue and all, was butchered before the year was out, his severed head hung where he once spoke justice. The old names fell like olives in autumn. And Octavius, my heir, grew colder than I ever was. More precise. Less forgiving. He played Antony against himself, played Rome like a liar, until there was no Senate, no Republic, no resistance. Only empire. Caesar Augustus, they called him. The first emperor. But it was my name that crowned him. My shadow that cleared his path. My death that built his throne. They built temples for me. Made me a god. Lit fires in my honor. And yet, none of it touched me. Not anymore. I watched, from where all men go. Beyond the veil of time. Beyond ambition. Beyond revenge. Was I wrong? Perhaps. Did I kill the Republic? Perhaps. But tell me, was it alive, truly, when I crossed the Rubicon? Or did I only unmask it, show the world what it had become? A theater of noble rot. A ghost clinging to empty forms. I gave Rome what it cried out for, direction. Momentum. Identity. I gave her empire. And for that, they stabbed me. I do not haunt them. I do not regret them. I do not even miss them. I became what all men of power become in the end, a lesson. Let them debate me. Let them curse me. Let them raise their children in the world I made. Julius Caesar, I was a man. Then a threat. Then a crown. Now, I am Rome.